I just have this guy.
Whoa.
I mean, to be fair, that is the candle I expect you to have. Yeah.
I also have this guy.
At home, I have the red
Put a candle
3D
in there.
printed Hank that Ted made me.
Nice.
Instead of a candle.
The what?
And then I have red Hank staring back at me.
Nice.
This guy, I think, is actually a candle holder.
Whoa.
Why do you have these things?
I collect doll heads.
Yeah, we got into this in
This one was my first one.
Horrible.
I got it in Barcelona. The story that they told is that it was a decommissioned
Are we recording this? I feel like this should be part of the podcast.
It is recording.
All right, this is definitely the intro.
It was like a World War II decommissioned doll factory in Germany, and they found all of these heads that were just like abandoned, and some artist found it and like painted on it and shit. That was my first one. Yeah. Then I got this one in Hawaii.
Yikes. That's
This one was
fucking terrifying, to be
Yeah, this
honest
one's-
with you. Well, wait, why is it the way that it is? Why is it
Like why-
open-ended on both ends? Yeah.
So like this side, they would put the like rubber cap that has the hair on it for when you have like a full doll, not just the head.
Now ask him why he knows that.
And then this side, this side's for, I don't know, activities.
The trachea.
No, I don't. I think this is probably just to attach it to the body. But she's
I
cute,
noticed
right?
that.
Something.
My nephew the other day made some like Lego thing, and he's like, "I made this for your desk. It's weird because you have weird things on your desk." It's like, all right.
I mean,
Not wrong.
we're all thinking it. He's just saying it.
All right, we're rolling. We get down to business now.
We're all misfits.
All right, you red tank bunch of misfits.
You're a scrappy little misfit, just like me.
Biggest bunch of misfits I ever set eyes on.
Good morning, Misfits. You are tuning into yet another special edition Misfit podcast. Gentlemen, we are about to embark on year number 13
Wowza.
at Misfit
Heavens.
Athletics.
It's a lot of years.
2012 cycle 1 was the very first beginning of the off season. Now we are in 2024 heading into the 2025 season, and phase 1 is upon us. Phase 1 begins Monday, September 9th at misfitathletics.com. If you are curious about what it looks like, you're going to be able to go on to Fitter and get the program preview, that full week 1, whether you're on MFT, Hatchet, or age group. So you can go in and take a look at that and kind of get a lay of the land and maybe connect the dots on a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. Hunter, you have a very special job today on the podcast.
Oh, go
I'm
on.
kind of excited about this, and when an introvert gets excited, he talks a lot. So
Okay,
if we go
yeah.
down a bit of a path today, one of the types of episodes where sometimes I lose you, I'm gonna need you to rein me in.
All right, got it.
We're gonna need to keep this train on the tracks
Okay, so to
Um,
be clear, my job is to
make
rein
sure
the
that I
other
don't.
introvert in. Got it.
Yes.
Okay,
Wrangler.
got it.
Yeah.
Drew. Okay,
And I'll make sure that
understood.
if we talk about golf or surfing, that we rein you in a little bit.
That you take a nap and got it. Okay.
Yes. So yeah, I just every year going into this stuff and laying out the new plan for the whole season, I typically take a little bit of time to reflect. And the amount of times that we've done this, the amount of sort of additions and progressions and upgrades that we've made over such a long period of time is kind of crazy to think about. Like it's
Yeah,
like we
we've had
just
a lot.
started. It's like we just started, but also have lived 12,000 lifetimes within the 13 years. I don't know. It's like a complicated thing to think about over that kind of period of time, especially when it's like a third of your life.
Yeah, I mean, both the program and the sport has gone through a lot of iterations,
Yes,
and
it
the
has.
program has followed along with the sport. The sport has gone through a shitload of changes and iterations over 12 years, and well, I don't think we've like tried to quote keep up with it. It's like I feel like we've always had a decent like handle on exactly what's supposed to be asked at like the methodological level from CrossFit terms, but it's definitely seen its changes from 2012 to here.
Yeah, for sure.
Remember when you couldn't convince somebody to sit on a machine for more than like 15 minutes at a time? You could bury him with a 78-minute hero workout, but don't you fucking ask me to row a 5K, I swear to God.
I think I bought all of my remote clients a heart rate monitor and a cheap Polar watch in 2015, somewhere around that range. It was like 3 to 5 years in, to try to convince them to start doing the zone 2 work, and their egos were not up for the task.
Yeah,
it just wasn't a play, like it wasn't like a part of, because you have some people who just based on their genetics and their aerobic capacity can take off on a run and actually run in zone 2, and then you have pretty high level athletes that can like barely walk / jog in zone 2.
Yeah.
And that really fucks with people, and it's like, well, that would be a reason maybe to do it more, but I know the ego hurts a little bit here, so.
Yeah.
That's so I wanted to start with how athletes can use their phase 0 experience and data to their advantage. I think obviously it's intentional that we put phase 0 right before phase 1 as opposed to right after quarterfinals. Going right into testing would be a huge problem there, but there's a level of momentum in terms of you have the actual right percentages, you know which benchmarks or time domains were a challenge for you, you know which machines you struggled a little bit on. And then one thing that I'm noticing with my athletes, whether they're quarterfinals level or semifinals level, is towards the end here, like week 3, week 4, week 5 of phase 0, they're starting to PR the shit out of their monostructural tests and benchmarks, and that's counterintuitive to how they felt about the lower volume that they followed over the course of the summer. But they actually recovered, they actually rested, and they're working that muscle of thinking about how you should attack a workout when you're trying to do it 4 times, as opposed to, you know, we're working on front squats and toes to bar in phase 1, and maybe we lock in on one of those movements, and how you did in the workout is much more up to what your goals were for it versus this is my time, times on the leaderboard.
Yeah, in a way, it's a little bit of a social experiment when it's like, well, everybody's doing phase 0. It's like, this is what the program calls for, and it's not a particularly high volume, at least relative to the rest of the year. It's like, and people are much more likely to do like, it's the person who sees the list of things to do and says like, oh, if I don't do everything, then I'm falling behind. And when the list is, when the only things on the list are the things that we think you should be doing, and then people do what they naturally do and check things off on the list, it's like, oh, it turns out in total that was less than you would be typically doing in, say, December, November, whatever time frame, and like you feel good. Is that weird? It's like, not really. It's like, that's kind of how it's supposed to work. That's why we put like things like deload notes and stuff like that, which we'll probably get into. And hopefully athletes who hear this recognize like, oh wow, it's like when you can tone it back a little bit, it turns out those are the times that super compensation effect takes hold.
Yeah, it's just nice to have proof of concept for athletes, because, you know, I'm thinking of a semifinals athlete that I coach, and semifinals prep is pretty gnarly, and it's very much geared towards like, how well can you do over the course of these 3 days? And we're going to do anything that we can to get you to that point. But there's a pretty good chance that stacking that level of prep and then into this like massive adrenaline dump of semifinals, that the runway to get you back to baseline for that super compensation is probably pretty long.
Yeah, I
that
think
that trajectory
there's a
is
huge
not
mental
quick.
component too, right? It's like that post competition adrenaline dump that happens,
Yeah.
and kind of the post competition blues that we've talked about before. It's probably a combination of that plus physical recovery, and like now's the time when you could imagine athletes are starting to get antsy and want to get back into
Yeah.
maybe slightly more structured training, and it's like,
Yeah.
let's fucking
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. It's funny too, because the younger athletes, semifinals gets done and they're like, they're taking the pitching machine to the face,
Yeah,
waiting
like
for next year's hockey
364 more
tryout.
years
Yeah.
hockey tryouts.
Like, and it's like, we're actually going to back way off for months. I think that's really challenging. So again, to see the PRs rolling through on lifts and monostructural tests, it's like we can, again, just have that little bit of proof of concept.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this, we can get into now a little bit of the structure of the way a single phase works. You mentioned deload, and that just brings to mind, we basically have test week and retest week, which are weeks 1 and week 9 of the phase. And then we have in weeks 2 through 7, we have one primer week, which is lower volume leading into test week. Again, reminding people that we need to be mindful of how to attack workouts when we're gaming them, when we're trying to quote unquote get the best score. And then we also ask athletes to deload for a week. So essentially, we are looking to beat the piss out of you for 5 of 9 weeks. And that is appropriate. 9 weeks back to back to back would be a problem. And again, that's one of the major things that changes over a long enough time horizon. It's like, we like the 9-week phase better because we can get some significantly better progressions in. We can really move the needle on multiple different things. But that again begs the question of 27 weeks straight of, taking the pitching machine to the face. Is that the right call? And the answer is definitely no. It doesn't really matter what level of competition you're at. So, all right. Choosing the right program and instructions. I think this is an important note here. Really high level. We have a program called MFT. This is for our professional athletes. If you qualify for semifinals of the CrossFit Games yearly, that is your expectation, then you should be following our MFT program. Another program called Hatchet. This is where the majority of misfits are. And that's also important because when you go on Discord and you have, private groups, text groups, Instagram chat, any of these different places where you're going to, check leaderboards and talk to people about the way that they're training, our largest group is Hatchet. And Hatchet is for quarterfinals athletes and open athletes. We have had an athlete qualify for semifinals out of the Hatchet program in the last 2 seasons, which has really been the emergence of setting the right parts of the community on the right programs, I think, have been the last 2 years.
I mean, as we record this, we're getting ready to go to the Masters CrossFit Games, and my competitive athlete, Kelly, basically did Hatchet the entire season. And is going to the Masters CrossFit Games. We had one athlete who did the affiliate program and qualified for the CrossFit Games.
I would say same with Kenzie,
as a master,
but she's probably closer to the open athlete instructions than the quarterfinals athlete.
Yeah, I mean, there were times when that was the case too. It was much lower volume, and it was like, okay, we're going to do a little bit less. That's fine. You're going to fucking get after it every time you do it.
Yeah, you guys are going to have a leaderboard when this drops with those 2 names on it. And I can bet you that you would be happy to finish wherever they finished. So just in terms of the efficacy of the Hatchet program. We also have an age group program. So this is for teens and masters, also having open and quarterfinals instructions in there. So if you're a teen or masters athlete and you're not quite at the quarterfinals level yet, there are scaling and equipment modifications. So you train in your garage for all workouts there. So The one thing that I'll say that is different this year about the instructions, and maybe a bit of a nod to some complaints that we've had from people who are a little bit closer to the weekend warrior status. Just the idea that like, hey, you guys have a great program, great community. I want to be part of it. I don't have time for this shit. Like, I want to come in and do something to the effect of like an affiliate class, your 60 minutes, your 90-minute type thing. Sometimes it's in my garage, sometimes it's at the affiliate, etc. So this year, when you go in and look at the open athlete instructions, it's very much just going to say do strength 1 and Metcon. Done. Like, I want you guys to be able to go in and see where you can personalize, just like the rest of our programs. But when you're chasing GPP, we are just going to make sure that you hit the right lifts and that you hit the right mix of time domains, Metcon, interval, bitch work, etc. Keeping it very simple there. And the cool thing is to sort of go back to what we were saying about Kelly and Kenzie. That's the basis of the quarterfinals program as well. So you'll go in and most days you'll see, okay, I want you to hit the same pieces at the open athlete, and then you can personalize after that. So you're always going to have an option for a bit of a lower volume, higher intensity thing, even if it's just like, hey, my Tuesdays are crazy, my Wednesdays are crazy. Like, I have athletes who at the semifinals level are low volume during the week and then high volume on the weekend. So those are things, changes that you can make as an athlete when you're looking through this stuff. The choosing your extras, I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this, Hunter. There's the idea of what I should be choosing based on my strengths and weaknesses, which is typically how a lot of people would think about it. But then also this idea of your like recovery protocols, or how much you're sleeping, how stressed you are, your genetics. We've had really high level games athletes that just don't do well with high volume. And then I've had closer to quarterfinals level athletes that thrive on higher volume. So it's such a personalized thing. And again, yeah, I'd be interested to hear your opinion before throwing mine out there.
I mean, so across the number of years that I've coached athletes spanning from CrossFit Games qualifier to affiliate athlete trying to do better at quarterfinals, there's never been a situation where we like reflect back and say, damn, we should have done more. It was always, maybe we should have done something, we could have done something differently, or this could have been better. But it was never like, man, the reason we didn't go farther was because we did not do that third or fourth training piece every single day. And what it comes down to is either execution of a workout, or maybe like, I'll leave that there. It's never been, we need to do more. When it comes to picking your pieces, kind of a good segue to like using phase 0. Like, one of the things that we write in all the workouts of phase 0 is like, this is your medium duration X stimulus. So for example, medium, I'm looking at speed, not volume, which is a 14-minute AMRAP of rowing double unders and dumbbell snatch. This is your medium duration cardio stimulus benchmark. And to be able, as an athlete, to be able to recognize the type of workout that you are testing or that you are doing, and then to say, man, every time a workout like this pops up where it's very manageable, think again, kind of maybe an easier one to think about is the deadlift jump rope rowing workout from the Open this past year, where it was just, transitions, just doing unbroken sets of very manageable size movements. The weights aren't ridiculous, whatever. If every time that kind of workout pops up and I do poorly on it, that's where we can start to zero in on exactly what sort of pieces that you should be picking. Whether it's trying to match up the exact stimulus of an optional conditioning piece or interval that shows up on the day. Maybe it's paying attention to the instructions for zone 1 and zone 2 work that gets sprinkled in throughout the week. But as soon as you can start paying attention to those things, and if your goal is competitive CrossFit, you have to be able to compare yourself against the field. So using the open leaderboard, quarterfinals leaderboard, whatever, the misfit leaderboard on Fitter, like where am I relative to the field, and why am I always deficient in this cardio style workout? Or why is it every time there's a set of 50 handstand push-ups slapped in the middle of a workout, like my workout tanks? And we can start to understand where your weaknesses lie from a very sport specific, whether it's a specific movement that gives you trouble, or more often than not, it's like an energy system type thing where it's like, I can go the same pace for fucking forever, from 15 minutes to 60 minutes. I can hold that pace, but as soon as you want me to do something in that Fran time domain, like I fall apart, or I just don't have the go. And I think that's where we can start to look at kind of the options, the pieces and whatnot, and also try to understand like the mandatory pieces that we say, like, hey, we think everybody should be doing at a minimum of these things. And it might only be those things that you are supposed to be doing. Say you're an open athlete, it's like maybe you do a lift and a Metcon, and that's it. And that's totally fine. But once you start thinking like, okay, I want to try to improve my placement, I have a very specific goal, then we can start to pick the additional pieces. But those mandatory pieces are what we think everybody should be doing. And if you do the mandatory pieces all year, you will have gotten the correct dose of short, medium, long, of thrusters, pull-ups and muscle ups and running and rowing and all that shit. The extra stuff is where it's like, okay, I do need extra rowing work. I do need extra muscle up skill work because, they fall apart, whatever it is. So using your phase zero data, comparing it with the Misfit leaderboard, comparing it with previous data, or just honestly, probably the best way to do it is to try to just compare it to yourself and be like, because a lot of it's confidence. It's like, what are the things that I struggle with, and where are there opportunities to do that style of workout in the optional pieces to get better?
Perfect segue to test retest importance. I'm leaning much more into the side of having my athletes specifically, and then asking the community to test retest basically all of the stuff that they need to, from a phase to phase sort of progression. As Hunter said, in a way, strength, fitness, skill, those boxes will be checked for every single person that follows our program. I have absolutely zero doubt in that. We know how to move the needle in each of these categories. We know how to make all of this stuff sort of, line up together. But will you know how to use it when the time comes? And I think that's such an important question for athletes to think about. We know of lower skill, lower fitness, lower strength athletes with the higher athlete IQ that can basically outmaneuver someone when the time comes in the open, quarterfinals, semifinals, etc. There is a level of confidence there. That's something that we need to dig into and uncover. But there's also just this idea of knowing, man, you see some really fit, really strong, really skilled people do some dumb shit in workouts. Especially because, again, we're talking about 27 weeks of getting after it, and the amount of lifts and metcons and skills and all these different things that we're going to get into. Like, you're doing all of those things, and you're doing them in a thoughtful way, but probably a way to try and improve. Expressing your fitness is a totally different thing. And if you don't know how to do it, and we do this as sort of a trick at training camps, we try to, one of the first workouts we do, have it be something that you need to pace very well. And we don't say that, and we turn the music all the way up and we tell people to get after it. And your splits from round 1 to round 7 are very different. That can be the same kind of thing, right? I've trained my ass off all year long. It's Friday Night Lights. Fucking Billy Bob in the corner doesn't even know what I've been up to in the shadows. And 3, 2, 1, go. Stomp that gas pedal. And, wherever it is, again, it could be event 1 of whatever your Super Bowl is, the quarterfinals, the semifinals. You can fuck the whole thing up in just that, moment, which is,
it's such a fucking weird thing to
it's a crazy
have
sport.
that sport be able to do that. It's like, Yeah.
You went too fast in round 1, season over.
Yeah. I mean, that literally can be it.
How absurd is
And
that?
yeah, it's insane. And especially when it goes the higher level, when it's actually like, hey, you don't get a chance at a redo. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's nothing more frustrating as a coach or an athlete, but more so certainly for me now as a coach, like of seeing somebody put in work, seeing somebody do as perceived as like the things that they need to do to get better. Like I know that they have the physical capability, and then for whatever reason, it's either a really poor strategic decision, and I would say that more often than not stems from maybe a lack of confidence or just like I don't know, maybe they didn't pay attention. Maybe they had the fitness, and when it didn't matter, because it didn't matter, they could just kind of get after it. But when it does matter, the over analysis comes into play, the adrenaline comes into play, and then it's like, come on, like my money was on you. Like I had the like. I was gonna win this one if you just fucking did what you've been doing all goddamn year, except now that 3, 2, 1 go and the music's at 12 instead of 11, you throw it in the garbage can. It's tough
So
to
we are
watch.
dedicating 6 of 27 weeks to this idea, which, if done properly, is very useful. Hunter, you'd be a good example of this. If you did one of the tests and then you had 72 hours to rest and you did the test again, there aren't many of them where you wouldn't be able to strategize a better score. And maybe
Yeah.
even not with, like, maybe you were at 100% effort the first time and you could beat the score at an 80 or 90% effort.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you not only have the answers to the test, but then we bias the thing for 7 more weeks and then ask you to do it again and you're not retesting better, something is very wrong. Something is like very, very wrong. Because again, if the insinuation is that Hunter with literally just the experience of doing the workout could do better, then what's happening here? And if you're listening to this and that's you, then we need to lean into this concept over the course of the year. You really need to be like, if I got to do this again while you have the like recency, like thinking, what could I change?
Yeah.
Write
I
that
don't know
shit
if that's
down.
I think like I've kind of always thought about it. It's like the initial intent of like the CrossFit test retest, which is like do Fran this year and then do Fran like a year and a half from now, and hopefully your
Yeah.
capacity, because the idea is like
Right.
your capacity gets better over a really long period of time,
Yeah.
sans competitive aspirations. But when it's like so close, when it used to be 7 weeks where our training phase was only 7 weeks, and I'm like, is this really like legitimately enough time to actually progress and make the things that we're testing better? Or is it purely just like what you're saying, the recency bias and understanding like, oh, I remember how this went. I remember what I did wrong. I'm not going to do that this time. And maybe you could improve, like you said, 72 hours later without any additional training, and you can improve. And to me, I'm like, is that a bug or is that a feature of the program? And I think it probably just depends on how you look at it. But I think to your point, there is an element of like, if you do the test, if you give it, we're assuming there's all reasonable effort here. You're not sandbagging one end and smashing it the other time. It's
Yeah.
like, there's no reason that you shouldn't improve, but the reason that you should improve is because you've learned more along the way. You also learned more about the initial, or learned from the initial attempt at that workout. And then you pair that with the biasing of those movements that happens over the middle 7 weeks of that training phase, and then it's like, okay, like you have to do better. There's no way. All the cards are stacked in your favor. Like, make it happen.
Strength work. I wanted to put this first for a couple of reasons. One of them mainly, I know. I love it.
Only, the main reason is because you like strength work more.
The time of year and the importance of it in terms of like as we progress through the season, like I call it, for lack of a better term, because obviously it's much more than just your lower half, but like getting your legs under you, like
Mhm.
giving enough space if you're truly focusing on strength in the off season because that's holding you back, giving enough space to, like, if you're following Hatchet, there's going to be a mandatory lift and a mandatory conditioning piece. When you go to choose an extra, it should be strength and accessory. And even like if it's possible, doing a double session, just that, again, so you can have the space for warming up properly, attacking it properly, having the right amount of like calories around it. There's a lot of different factors when it comes to getting stronger. And this would be the time of year where I think someone should lean into that much harder than, February, March.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think of it as, and if anybody who ever played sports in high school and got back into training, whether it was two a days or whatever, it's like that feeling of just being out of shape, your legs just aren't under you, whatever. Literally, just feeling that terrible feeling of like, fuck, have I ever played this sport before? Like, am I in shape in any capacity? I think it's always good to like kick things back off with that. And we talk about it enough that like, if you don't have a strong foundation to squat, jump, run, pull from, like you're already well behind the curve. So I think it's perfectly, like, makes total sense to start with the volume back squat phase, which is a real kick in the nuts.
So it is different this year, though. The volume back squat phase is 2 days a week instead of 3 days a week. You would be following a very similar 5-4-3 progression. So I will
Back
put
in
that
my
out there.
fucking day.
Back in your day, we did Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That was the first one.
Yeah, and I was in a wheelchair, coming into and out of the gym in a wheelchair on Wednesday.
The
3
people
by
with the
3
genetics to handle it got stronger than any other phase that we've had.
I added
Got
like
it.
65 pounds to my back squat doing that. It's something crazy
That's
like that.
fucking ridiculous, Doug.
A lot of that research is actually based on the super compensation concept of like, we put you way below the line. We put you so far below the line you couldn't see it.
Yeah.
And then
Tuesdays
you
Yeah.
were
pop
a
back
real
out.
bitch.
Yeah.
Tuesdays were
Yeah,
the
the
worst.
4x4 was the miserable one. That like last 4x4 at like 90%, it was like, fuck is this? Like
Oh, it's still there. Don't worry about it.
Rest
You'll
3
find out.
days between your sets. Got it.
So, as Hunter alluded to, all programs will be focusing on 1 rep max strength for the back squat. We will be doing volume work with squat snatch. Think training for the semifinals snatch ladder type of event. We got sets at 12, we got sets at 10, we've got sets at 8 that go through a linear progression there. Please follow the instructions. It's not a Metcon. It is supposed to blur the lines a little bit because this is something that is continually asked for in our sport, whether it is hidden inside of a Metcon or, just lifting itself. So blur the lines a little bit. We want the fatigue there, but these are not for time. We will be digging into technique and positional work with your squat clean. And then last but not least, we want to make sure that we continue to deadlift, but that will be speed work so that we don't bury you with the CNS fatigue of the back squat and then going into that.
There's a sneaky, like, really useful kind of progression, or at least maybe for an athlete, a kind of a mindset to think about, especially like, again, we talk about it a lot. The back squat, as functional, as useful as it is, doesn't actually pop up in the sport very much until you get to a higher level, and that high level being semifinals and above. Like, we'll probably see a back squat in quarterfinals at some point, but for the most part, your squat strength is meant to kind of translate into things like your clean and therefore your thruster and the more kind of sport specific movements. So you're back squatting really, really heavy. Kind of the stimulus here is to get your, like you said, get your legs under you. If you have a clean phase that is technique work and a deadlift phase that is speed work, like, how could we combine those 3 things together better to set you up to get stronger in the Olympic lifts. Like if you can get your legs under you with some good quality back squats in good positions, you take the clean work and really adopt kind of a like loading doesn't matter. It's all about my positions. It's all about moving this barbell correctly. And then you also, work on that speed from the floor with the deadlift. Like all three of those things combined together. I'm not saying it doesn't work perfectly like that, but that's a pretty fucking nice triangle for a CrossFitter specifically to improve their Olympic lifts. So if the goal is that, like, don't worry, you'll get your heavy clean phase coming up later in the year. But for now, like, take really good advantage of building a strong foundation in both like lower body strength, like raw strength, and some technique work that's really going to pay off later in the year.
If you look close enough, there's a single tear just going down my face for that explanation. MFT will have the following lifts as mandatory lifts. So at this point in the year, semifinals CrossFit Games athletes, you will be doing a lot of lifting and a lot of bitch work. So you'll be strict pressing twice a week, you'll be bench pressing, and you'll be doing some higher volume lunge work. Those are all non-mandatory on Hatchet. So this is where we come back into the personalization and what is different about Misfit Athletics. Your ability to go in and say, I really do need to work on my pressing strength. I need the lunges to go with the back squat, to go with the speed work on the deadlift to really get my legs ready. Or I'm going to lift those 5 days a week that we just talked about, but this is the sport of fitness. And I am lacking, on the rower in metcons and intervals, etc. So that's how you start to think about what you're trying to accomplish within this phase when it comes to how you personalize. All right. Same sort of concept here going into the bitch work. For anyone new to Misfit Athletics, we refer to monostructural conditioning as bitch work. The time of year and importance of bitch work. Dare we talk again about bitch work being the funnel to interval work, being the funnel to...
Damn, that's its own podcast.
Yeah, it is. We go back up to the test retest model, and you say, thanks a lot for calling me out, coach. Fuck you. I don't know what to do about it. Let's talk about what you can do about it. You can start the year being incredibly mindful about the way that you attack bitch work. You fill out your gears matrix. You pay attention to your zone 2 work. You really, each day, each week, you highlight those things. That is what you're locked in on. You know that your test retest in the row FTP test and Torta Misfit and the cube test and power output, all these things, that's what I'm locked in on in phase 1. When you do that and you pay attention to the way that you feel in bitch work, then you can take that to interval work. We slide over to interval work in phase 2 and you ask yourself,
one of the few times I care about your feelings.
Interval work in phase 2, guess what? We throw you, we toss the ball up to you for a nice layup, nice alley-oop. There's going to be rowing and biking and running and things like that in the intervals. So you have this little bridge over, but you're also going to have things like wall balls, front squats, and whatever, CrossFit movements. Then you get a rest period to be like, was that what I was looking for? Am I going hard enough? Was I going too slow? Did I not do this well or do that well? And then last but not least, we transition that over to metcons and we understand what we are capable of when it comes to feeling, when it comes to executing, when it comes to doing all of these things. You pay attention to using those as you work through the season or even work through a week where you're just reminding yourself, hey, I got this interval and I know how nasty 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off is on a rower. I'm chasing that feeling without blowing myself up, that sort of thing. So beginning the year with setting that base isn't just about power output, zone 1 and zone 2, aerobic, anaerobic. It's not just about those things. That's going to work for basically everyone. But do you know how to then go use it somewhere? Because again, like I just, why that stuff is called bitch work, how much it hurts to do it and not benefiting from it. when you're tested is
Yeah, we gotta take the monitor that you get to sit in front of on any given machine and bring that with you when you're not sitting in front of a machine. That's
Yep.
really what the goal is. And the bitch work, you kind of just alluded to it, is going to cover you from an energy system standpoint. And that's what the sport tests, right? That's why when we go to the CrossFit games, there's, a dozen, or not a dozen, a half dozen 2-minute workouts, and, or, 4 or 5 2-minute workouts, and there's a bunch of medium duration workouts. There's only a few long duration workouts. And that's a combination of the methodology and the way that, the CrossFit believes that testing fitness is, or it's the reason why CrossFit tests fitness the way that it does. But ultimately, like, to train for that, we need all 3 of your energy systems, or 4, depending on who you ask, firing, kind of in unison. But you can train that really, really well. But if you don't pay attention to how to apply it to the sport specific workouts, it doesn't matter. That goes back to the original example of the person who just, crushed every single workout all year long. But when it was 3, 2, 1, go in the CrossFit Open, you went out too fast in round 1. You just lost your entire season. The bitch work is meant to calibrate you so that you can take it off the machine and then have a theoretical kind of display for how exactly fast you're going when you're doing fucking thrusters and burpee box jump overs.
our aerobic bias for the phase on all programs is the C2 bike. We really like starting this time of year, logging some serious meters when it comes to the C2 bike. Really works wonders for your lower half. We have a little bit of a talk fairly often on this podcast about the remote coaching realm being like the testing ground for what gets brought to the masses. And I got really good feedback from Paige on her games prep in terms of mixed modality machines, especially within the anaerobic, the place where we're asking someone to go really hard for kind of a long period of time when you do add up all the intervals together. So that's going to be your, gears 4 through 8. So instead of, especially for all of you that just finished. Both my screens just turned off.
You froze there for a second. You're back though.
That's weird. Cool. Especially for all of you that just did phase 0 and had to do all of the cube tests. You are now going to do, I don't know that this is a gift, to be perfectly honest. Anyone who I've mentioned it to so far is upset about it. But you're doing the cube test alternating between rowing and skiing. So there'd be 2 rounds of rowing and 2 rounds of skiing. And that gives us an opportunity to have that mixed modality work throughout the phase. And the cool thing here is you get proof of concept on the idea of variance and intensity and stimulus over specializing on a particular movement. Paige found that she was able to push herself in more rounds by going back and forth or by rotating specific machines. And you could tell in her training, in her performance there. So that's going to be our anaerobic bias. Something that has shown up and then gone away and then come back on our program is biasing a power output movement and having a test. And fortunately or unfortunately, you will have a 50 cal echo bike test within test week. And the reason why that's not, 30 seconds all out is because closer to that, like 500 meter row stimulus has a much closer place to what we're looking for within the sport of CrossFit. We don't want someone who is big or fast twitch to be able to go into the thing and rely solely on that, right? Because like I can go get me like low to mid 30s in calories, snap my fingers. Well, it might take me a month to do 36.
Yeah.
That is something that we need to make sure is part of that power output test, because you can trick yourself into thinking that you're a monster on an echo bike because you're fast twitch, and then you can't repeat anything. And that's always what they're asking for there. Where the program split off a little bit, MFT, so our semifinals and CrossFit Games athletes, the mandatory zone 2 work will be running. The amount of running and echo bike that have been programmed at the semifinals and the CrossFit Games over the last few years has sort of forced our hand to bring more of that to our biases versus the traditional row ski C2 bike. The hatchet zone 2 work will be rowing. The progression that makes the most sense in terms of efficacy, if I do get 27 weeks with an athlete, is I start them in zone 2, then I move them to an aerobic bias, then I move them to an anaerobic bias. So we're going to begin phase 1 for hatchet athletes, open and quarterfinals athletes on the rower. Now, what's different about that this year is I, again, want to give you guys a way to feel like you're progressing, a way to feel like you can measure how this is affecting what you're doing. So you're going to start out with an FTP test in week 1. You're going to row for 20 minutes after a nice warm-up, and you're going to see what your average wattage is within that. Your average wattage will then be put into a little equation to give you your FTP, which is your functional threshold pace. You will then be assigned percentage of that as your zone 2 work. You're going to sit down on a rower, and it's going to tell you that you're going to hold 115 watts for your 45-minute working window. And then we're just going to go up linear progression study to spend a week or two at 55% of that, then go to 60, then go to 65, etc. And again, the point of that is to like really try to lock you guys in on what you're trying to do here, what you're trying to accomplish, without allowing you to go too hard. We get a lot of athletes that get so wrapped up in the heart rate side of things that they lose their mind when they can't get to the heart rate, or they can't really accomplish much, below the heart rate, etc. So I think you'll find that with a bit more of a relaxed, like I'm just staring at the wattage the whole time, that your heart rate will play along, potentially spend more time in zone 1, which is also helpful. But just pay attention to that. I have also made a spreadsheet that will be in Fitter along with the rest of your phase 1 documents, where you just put in your score and it gives you all of your wattage for the whole thing. So there's too much math in there if you don't like math. So I've met a few people that, that are super smart, that just standard addition is not possible for them for some reason. So we've got a spreadsheet there. You go in, you plug it in, you're good to go. And then something that's a little bit different this year, something that I think is important and I've used quite a bit for athletes, especially that have a full-time job, that are trying to reach higher levels in the sport. We have a zone 1 option on rest days. So it just lets you know, like, hey, we do want athletes to have one of those active rest days where they get the zone 2 work in for a lot of people. But if you're feeling really beat up, but still want to be able to make some progress, we've got a zone 1 option in there for you. So if you're going to go spin on the C2 bike on your active rest day and you're just like, I didn't sleep well, I'm not feeling it, I want to, whatever, have the fucking iPad out and watch a movie or whatever it is, we've got the option in there for you to be able to do zone 1 work as well. And the fitter you are, the more efficacy there is to a zone 1 session.
Yeah, I don't know that, like, I've personally, my zone 2 work has been like, I don't remember when I started doing it or when we talked about it, but like heart rate has been quite a bit lower for me. Maybe talking to one of our other coaches, Mark, who got some like crazy testing done because he's super into endurance and cycling right now. But his zone 2 like heart rate was much lower than like like that 180 minus your age kind of benchmark. And I've also managed to kind of put myself a little bit lower, like much closer to like the low end of that. And I've seen certainly no less progress, maybe more progress in that regard, especially as to how it applies to like my CrossFit conditioning versus
Yeah.
like just monostructural. So I don't think people should be scared of the idea that their heart rates are like much lower than usual. I think you'd actually be surprised at how beneficial being on the lower end of that range can be. So
And the two explanations and reasons for that. Number one, the more localized the machine that you're working on, the more likely what Hunter is talking about is possible. So like running 180 minus your age, the Maffetone, where that came from was from the running community. When we go over to a stationary bike, obviously significantly harder to get your heart rate up because you're sitting on a machine and not using much of your midline and essentially none of your upper body. And then the other reason would be your fitness level. So like thinking of Mark specifically with how good he is on a bike, his functional threshold pace actually happens at a lower heart rate due to fitness level, essentially. And then the ultimate example of that is, man, it's the percentage is absurd. It's like 80 or 90% of Kipchoge's training is zone 1. And
zone 1.
He's zone 1. So he runs.
What does he define
it
zone
is.
1 as? Like traditional, like what you? If I
yeah,
Google
so
it
would
now,
be
that
for his age. If I had to guess, is probably like 100 to 120 heart rate.
Wow,
somewhere in that range would be his zone 1. It's typically zone 2 is going to be about 20 beat range, and zone 1 will also be roughly a 20 beat range, whereas the higher ones are more like 10. As you get up to whatever, say your zone 5 is like 170 to 180.
Yeah.
And for anyone that doesn't know, he's the sub 2 hour marathon guy. And his zone 1 is like a 640 mile. It might even be faster. I know it's in the 6s. Yeah. So he can keep his heart rate.
Dude's running a 640
like
at the same effort that I'm like sitting here talking about this fucking podcast.
Yeah, pretty crazy. All right. Last but not least, very important here. Very good way to explain a lot of what we do and how we do it at Misfit Athletics is the sports-specific testing. There is a list of 13 movements that we will be locked in on for the entire year. These 13 movements are ones that you won't hear brought up a ton in the strength work from a traditional strength work standpoint, and a ton within the bitch work. Sort of just meaning that we've got a lot of those boxes checked already. They could be part of the test, but they're not going to be progressed in the same way. The 5 of those movements show up in phase 1. So we have front squat and toe to bar as our Metcon test. Hunter's got a nice little ditty for you there, and then a lot of front squatting and toes to bar over those middle 7 weeks. And then Kyle cooked up as the interval test a double under wall ball burpee box jump over test, which very much was a community-wide, the athlete IQ, honestly, not even just the Misfit community, the CrossFit community, the athlete IQ test that was the wall ball burpee box jump over workout within quarterfinals. That gave people some serious problems. So we are addressing that early and often for sure. Now, why would we lean into testing these things when we're so far away from the season? There's 2 responses to that. One, we already talked about it. We are practicing getting better at doing these things. So you will front squat. Let's use the front squat toe to bar as an example. You front squat weekly within a workout. You will toe to bar every other week, and then have a practice session with your toes to bar to, sort of get into those at a lower intensity. We're doing those things the whole year. Like, you're still going to front squat, you're still going to toe to bar on a regular basis. We have the movements highlighted that they continue to use over and over and over. And then the other side of this would be the complexity will increase as the season goes on. So if we're talking about muscle ups and snatches and, legless rope climbs, whatever it is, those things get pushed in terms of the actual test retest further out into the season because we need the recency to be there. which would sort of go back to what we talked about with the back squat, right? So we're leaning into maxing out your back squat, then we'll snatch or clean, then we'll snatch or clean. And again, that moves us to more sport specific. So as you'll notice, as the phases go on, these things increase in complexity. And don't be worried about like, oh, we did our front squats and toes to bar and they were feeling awesome when I retested in November and then they didn't come up again. You've seen the amount of workouts that we program, and there's only 13 movements that they keep programming over and over. You can bet your ass you'll be doing plenty of toes to bar throughout the entire season.
Yeah, I think the complexity going from kind of simpler to more complex is helpful to kind of think about it just from a standpoint of, while it is necessary and important to be good at the sexy movement, the squat, snatch, the muscle ups and stuff like that, again, in the same way that, like, you know, we saw crossover double unders and, you know, freestanding handstand triple unders at the games. It constitutes an extremely small like portion of the things that are going to get tested. Wall ball double under, burpee box jump over, I'm way more interested in seeing how well you progress in those movements and how your capacity and your athlete IQ increases there versus your Amanda time, for example, or squats, you know, a squat snatch muscle up sort of thing. Not because those aren't useful and important and valuable, but there is a hierarchy, and I'm going to say your wall ball double under burpee box jump over is more valuable from you know, an athlete IQ and overall fitness standpoint than those more complex things. So like, they're still going to pop up. You're still going to see them in skill. You're still going to have regular opportunities to work on them. Just don't get too wrapped up in the fact that, you know, it's like, Jesus, more fucking wall balls and burpee box jump overs. It's like, yes, absolutely, more of them. And the more that you complain about them, the more that they're going to show up.
He's not wrong. Okay, so we just spent 56 minutes and 38 seconds essentially going over what we're going to bias. We have to end that conversation with the asterisk that the C2 bike aerobic bias, that's 4 workouts over the course of 9 weeks because we need variance, right? So we lock in on these things and we talk to you about them. All of the other, you know, spaces here, filling in the cracks, that is what the program is. So we use these things to bias, to show you progressions, to show you that you are improving, that you are getting better, to give you the knowledge that you need to succeed. But there is so much other stuff in there, and it's just couplets, triplets, metcons, intervals, bitch work. It's all machines. It's all of the gymnastics movements that they test. It's all the accessory movements that help us move the needle. There is so much other work in there that I think when you listen to a podcast like this, going to see the program preview or opening up week 1 and seeing, like, well, week 1's test week, so that's probably not the best example, but week 2, you'll really see like, hey, this is a well-rounded program and this is not just a toe to bar, like 9 weeks of toes to bar.
Yeah, I think that, like, it's weird in the sense that we spend a lot of time or spend an entire podcast talking about the very specific things that are like create the template for the entire phase. And ultimately the reason for that is because, like, well, we do need to progress in some logical manner from the beginning to the end of the season. But what happens in between then, even that is highly personalized. You've got somebody who is an extremely high level athlete who just needs to maintain their GPP or has just a couple of small things that they need to shore up. You know, that's the type of person who, as a remote, you know, maybe as a remote athlete, and is like, hey, like phase 1 for all intents and purposes is just kind of like, it's that time of year again. It's not necessarily like, hey, we're going to follow these exact progressions to get you specific at the exact things that we just talked about on the podcast. There are tools that we use to improve your overall work capacity across the things that you are going to be expected to perform in competition. So don't get wrapped up in like, well, when are we going to bias muscle ups and when are we going to bias, you know, the overhead squat or whatever. It's like that. Remember, CrossFit is a general physical preparedness program, and we want you to be good at a lot of things all the time, not a couple of things some of the time.
We got a handful of programming, housekeeping type of things that are, either new or stuff that I feel like we should mention as we go through. There is 1 day a week on MFT and I believe 2 days a week on Hatchet, but there's non-mandatory bitch work that uses the tools that I would use if someone was really struggling physically or mentally on a machine in a remote coaching setting. So I'll give an example here. Aerobic echo bike third gear would typically be AMRAP 5 minutes times 5, rest 2 minutes of echo bike calories. Sounds fun, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm sick.
Phase
Go feed my
1,
gerbil.
that will be chopped up as much as possible to give you context on what you're capable of from a physical standpoint. I think honestly, so much of this to me is mental and progressing athletes through it, but it is AMRAP 2.5 minutes times 10, rest 1 minute. You're basically doubling the amount of rounds and cutting the work and rest windows in half. So it's the exact same amount of volume. You would be side by side with another athlete and you would end up doing the same amount of work in the same overall period of time. But I refer to them as bite-sized chunks, just basically being like, I know that you can do this. You haven't put in enough time to sort of work that mental muscle. So that's how we're going to do it. So any of the non-mandatory work that you see is not only there for you to get better at the thing, just because it's something that you've decided you need to work on. We are giving you a bit of runway. So it'll be broken up a little bit less in phase 2 and then a lot less in phase 3. But that's something that you want to kind of pay attention to, especially if it's a weakness. A brand new, I would call it a column. You guys don't see it in sheets, so it's not a column. It's a category. It's called practice. And there will be an accompanying kind of article and explanation of how to attack this. But essentially, within a given week, it is not possible to write a well-rounded program and have you expose yourself to all of the movements that you would normally see within a program as we expand the time horizon. This is something that we did with the reps. If you followed our quarterfinals prep, semifinals prep, CrossFit Games prep, where we're essentially taking anything that is not showing up in the program, that shows up in the sport a lot, and giving you an opportunity to get some practice in there. So give you an example of a practice session. We have 3 rounds, 1 easy set of muscle ups, 500-meter echo bike at forever pace. That's essentially just a flush. 1 smooth set of single crossovers, another bike, 1 easy set of muscle ups, another bike, and then 1 easy set of farmer's hold step ups. Stand all the way up at the top of the box. See if we can not have that happen.
2 reps, got it.
This year, CrossFit community. And the idea here is, again, those movements might not show up in a Metcon or an interval. So we are going to put them in a practice session. All of these are non-mandatory. This is a place where you really need to lean into the personalization of this program. You're going to see things like handstand push-ups and toes to bar and muscle ups and legless rope climbs. You need to lock in on the things that you need to work on and sort of follow the progression throughout the phase. And again, those instructions will always be in there for you. You can always, sort of scroll up to the top on Fitter and read those. Not for time, not a Metcon, not looking to see how many muscle ups you can do at once. In that example, you got 6 sets of muscle ups. That is plenty of exposure in September to a movement that you need to be really proficient at in March. So when you're looking at those, again, try to choose them and create a bit of a pattern. I need to work on my muscle ups or my handstand push-ups or my handstand walking or my toes to bar, and I'm going to lean into those, and that's how I'm going to personalize my program.
Yeah, I think the practice column, the reps column, the skill column, skill categories rather, it's just such an underutilized thing for, I would say more so probably almost like amateur CrossFit level competitors. So somebody who's really it's just like Metcon, lift, whatever. And it becomes really difficult to pull movements out that you're struggling with and practice. And it just goes back to think about playing a sport as a kid, when you played. So hockey for me, I played a lot of hockey, played hockey growing up. It's we don't do like figure eight stick handling drills because like the game of hockey asks me to stick handle in a figure eight. It's like, no, the idea is like, can you handle the puck while you're changing directions, while the puck is moving directions, which is a skill that is obviously necessary to play hockey. And it's the same thing with CrossFit. Like, these things should be treated as the drills that you didn't like doing when you were playing. You're taking free throws, you're taking, basketball, or you're receiving a soccer ball, you're working on your touch or whatever. It's like all of these little skills will add up and stack over the course of the next 6 or 9 months, whenever the season starts. And so taking advantage of those things now, and the fact that there's zero pressure from a competitive standpoint for that. Like, there's no reason to try to win a practice session, right? It's like, how well can I do this? And then hopefully, can I do it almost as well when I'm breathing really hard? Because that's how you're going to move the needle and feel a lot more confident about these movements come the open, quarterfinals, and maybe semis.
Yeah, I think the idea came from what you just brought up. And it's like, we just like play the sport all the time when it comes to CrossFit. And it's like, man, how do you get to a point where you can like throw a pass in football where you can't see over your lineman or there's a hand in your face? And it's because you threw 612 slants this week in practice. Yeah. And things become second nature to you. And I would say the advantage on the other end of the spectrum that I got feedback on from a few very high level athletes was just like, it was nice to be able to get into these movements and maybe even use them as a warm up or something like that, but not have to bash my head against the wall. Like, I only get a couple of the, I get to do that like twice a day. So for you to come in and say like back way off and just do these things, it was like they felt fresh the next time I went to do them, even though it wasn't like, crank the throttle the entire time.
Yeah.
All right. Last but not least, we will finish with how we deload at Misfit Athletics. You will notice starting in week 3 of phase 1 and all the way up through week 7, there will be instructions telling you that you should deload at least for a week during one of those. So you should choose week 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 to deload, and you will have 2 options of what to do within the deload. There is a fully built out deload template that's just like, this is exactly what we want you to do on each day. You'll still go through similar movement patterns at lower intensity, lower weights, etc., and sort of alternate days of that over the course of the week. And then there is a thoroughly explained way to build your own deload week. I know that there are some athletes that are just like, you can't tell me what to do for 9 weeks straight. I just won't stand for it. So we have both of those options. Most people just choose the pre-built one. So we are looking for athletes to do that. I find most of the time with athletes, at least 1 or 2 deloads are just built into life because of like a vacation or whatever. But there are people who don't travel a bunch, that maybe aren't as social, whatever it is, and they can get into a pattern of just hammering themselves way too much. And I don't know, it's interesting. Like, some people really struggle at the beginning of a phase just because it's a new stimulus and we're, leaning into certain movements, and you would actually benefit the most from deloading in week 3 because you've gone test week 1, 2, giving yourself a little bit of time, and then you can sort of ease yourself back into things. And then other athletes, it's pretty straightforward. Like, a lot of my athletes will deload in like week 5 or 6. They've sort of reached the end of what's possible for them in terms of continuing to push. And then we just set ourselves up really well for primer week and retest. But if you follow every single piece from an instruction standpoint from week 1 through week 9, without deloading, you will be worse than someone who deloads. I fucking get it. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what your training age is. Put more eggs into the training basket on those other weeks versus going through the motion.
You really just have to pay attention to yourself and how you feel. If you do have the good fortune of having consistent training partners, and they're in need of a deload and you're not, or vice versa, you're in need of a deload and you're not. It's not one of those things that you should all right, I'll train with you, like I'll get after it with you if you're the one in need of a deload, or vice versa. It's like you got to understand, like, your progress hinges on getting sufficient recovery so that you can realize all of the fitness gains that you've made. And if you don't give your body the opportunity to do that, you're just never going to see those gains, and you're going to get hurt. You're going to be burnt out. You're going to get sick. Like, we see that all the time. Athletes who get forced into a deload because they didn't heed the warning signs of their own body saying, like, hey man, like, what if we just pump the brakes for like a week? And by pump the brakes, I mean like do one or two fewer things per day than you were doing before. We're not asking you to fucking sit on a couch and stare at the sun. Like, just, pull back on a couple training pieces and for a week and see what happens to you the following week.
So my final thoughts are related to what you could accomplish on our program in a bubble completely on your own, and then what you could accomplish within our programming by participating on Discord, by listening to podcasts, by watching content. We wish we could remote coach everyone. Well, we wish it was possible for all of our clients to be remote coached. That might be a rough existence as a coach.
Yeah.
Obviously, for a ton of reasons, that's not possible. So that is our goal when making content, when creating the community, when having training camps, doing all of these different things. We need to get you immersed in this and surrounded by coaches and like-minded individuals. And I think a lot of people just assume that, like, in Discord or, any of the friend groups that have been created at our training camps, that like those things are solidified and they're just there, and like you're not in the like cool kids club. And the people that follow our program could not be more different than that. Like, if you go just into your web browser, discord.gg/Misfit Athletics, you'll be able to figure out how to sign up for it. It's completely free, and you go in and you communicate with the other people that are following. And I promise you that being around those people, the program will make more sense. It'll be easier to execute on what you're doing. People go in there and talk about how the, motivation has dropped in this certain week and what would you do about it and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot that goes into the, I don't even know really what to call it, the ecosystem that surrounds the program. And why we put so much effort into that, and why our, the other people following the program sort of help us do that. So I would say your, like, truly your peak ability from a physical standpoint, if your end all be all is that leaderboard, community participation is a part of getting to that place.
I think my final thoughts for, the phase 1 podcast is that, we get a lot of instances where athletes, we had it this past year, actually, a couple times, athletes kind of surprising themselves in qualifying for a stage of competition that they maybe didn't expect to, whether it was semifinals or the CrossFit Games. And my kind of call to you all listening is like, why can't that be you? Why can't you commit to, and that might be a deeper question, but why can't you say to yourself, this year it's like, okay, I'm going to heed the advice. I'm going to listen to the podcast. I'm going to join the community. I'm going to do, what the program recommends, but I'm not going to do more. I'm going to take the deload weeks. I'm going to essentially, I'm going to be the ideal follower of Misfit Athletics. And, that probably doesn't exist, but the question of why can't that be me? For a lot of athletes, it just comes down to, by the end of the year, they've stacked too many things. They, I never took the time to practice X, Y, or Z. I never took the time to do my bitch work or to do my zone 1 and zone 2 work on my rest days and stuff like that. And, you miss one or two of those here and there, and that's one thing. But then you start doing that over the course of an entire season, And that is when those things do start to add up, against you. And that's not to say like, hey, if you start to fall off the wagon, like you're screwed, because you're not. But the key is to have more, put more positive training days, more training days where you're like, okay, I did what I was supposed to. I did all the things right, or at least to the best of my ability. I paid attention. I recorded my numbers. I did all that stuff. Like, why can't that surprise, quarterfinal qualification, semifinal qualification, or CrossFit Games qualification? Why can't that be you? And for a lot of athletes, they could probably look back and say, like, on, a season that maybe didn't go to plan, they could be like, well, I could point to 7 or 8 things that were under my control that, maybe had gone the other direction, would have resulted in me making it to that stage of competition. And I think it's just like, people spend so much fucking time and effort trying to achieve a certain thing or a level of competition, but like, you have to, like, the little things that we're talking about are the things that create that result. There's no like, the qualification is not a result of crushing a specific workout. The qualification was a result of crushing the specific workout that you worked on all fucking year and put all of those little pieces together at the right time in the right place. So, I think my final thoughts for phase 1 is like, hey, why isn't this your year?
Man, the people who do the things that you just laid out get better every single year. And I fucking keep track.
Yeah.
Every single year. We have our top examples of people at the CrossFit Games levels. We have our semifinals athletes. We have our quarterfinals athletes. The athletes who ask the right questions and sort of keep in touch with me over the course of the season, just, in Instagram or Discord DMs. I go and check their leaderboard placements, and it's not a place or two. It is, relative to how many people are entering the competition, it is significantly higher for every single one of those people. So like Hunter said, why aren't you going to be one of those people this year? Did we do it?
Done.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Misfit Podcast, Phase 1, Monday, September 9th. You can head to misfitathletics.com now and maneuver your way to Fitter for the program preview if you want to get a little bit of a glimpse of what this looks like before deciding if you want to sign up. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're like, fuck, it'd be so cool if these guys did affiliate programming. We do. You can head to teammisfit.com in the Sugar Wad Marketplace to get signed up for that. Like Hunter said, we are off to the Masters CrossFit Games. I'd say see you there, but I think it will be in the past when this drops. So
saw you then, maybe.
Saw you then. Fuck. Bye.